Good evening. I'm Mike Rosen. I am your current mayor, and I thank you. And joining me tonight will be Kim Dunscombe, who is our acting finance director, who will be presenting the hard stuff. So I appreciate all of you who came. We do have all three branches of government with us tonight. Council members, if you wouldn't mind standing so people can see you and recognize you, thank you. And Judge Weiss from the courts. And then we also have director, staff, and command staff as well from the police. And I want to tell you that it is a tremendous honor to work with our staff at the City of Edmonds. These people are smart and incredibly loyal to the citizens of this community. And I am grateful to have the opportunity to work with them. They solve problems that I could not imagine community members could put in front of them. And they figure it out, and they figure out ways to prevent it in the future. And I also want to thank all the community members, those who came, those who are watching virtually, those who participated on the Blue Ribbon panel, on the Budget by Priorities, advisory panel, survey respondents, focus group participants, you, of course, and then all those people who have sent more than a few emails and calls. But I do thank you because that's how we got to this. So tonight I've got more than a few introductory comments, and then Kim will talk some numbers, and then I'll come back and do some closing comments. Before I get to that, I did buy a new shirt for tonight, and I would like you to take note. Well, it's not that one. It's this one. And I thought and I thought, well, maybe not. Maybe not. You know, people in this town, we love our community. When we ask people in the survey, how would you rate the quality of life in Edmonds? Look at these numbers in both of the surveys. That 94 and 93% said that it is good or excellent. There are communities everywhere that would give anything to have that kind of a response. We love this place. And I think it's good for, as we're about to talk about other things, to sort of keep that in mind. You know, we are here to talk about finances. And, you know, if you are in any way having any kind of anxiety in your life about your personal finances, raise your hand. Nobody? Really? All right. All right. So for those of you who are feeling it and not raising your hand, for those of you who aren't feeling any, good for you. You are the exception. If you look at it across all generations, there is anxiety, and it's for different reasons, but there is anxiety in this country about our finances, and for good reasons, right? There's a lot to be anxious about. So in trying to think about how to describe what it's like to create a budget for a city with 42,000 people in it, it's really pretty much like trying to create the perfect chocolate chip cookie, right? Because everybody has an opinion about the perfect chocolate chip cookie. But if there's a lot of people, that's a lot of opinions, right? Some of us like it. Well, first, let's go back to according to who, right? The perfect chocolate chip according to who? So as I was saying, but right, lots of different choices in terms of texture or color, how many chocolate chips you like in it. Some people are saying, what are you talking about, cookies? Just give me the dough. So lots of opinions, and this is just about a chocolate chip cookie. So think about the scale of a city and all the decisions and all the opinions about all the different things. But now imagine if we can have the conversation about, first, is it a chocolate chip cookie that we're going to talk about? Then all these different opinions about a chocolate chip cookie. What if you don't have enough money to buy the chocolate chips or the flour or the sugar, right? Then pretty much nobody's going to be happy. And that's sort of our reality. We're trying to create the perfect chocolate chip cookie for all sorts of opinions on all sorts of issues, and we don't have the money. This is how I've tried to approach the position since I took it. This is how I am approaching it now, and just being straight out with what we know. Again, it's always good, when you're in situations like this, we want a quick fix, we want to know who to blame, we want to know how to get there, how we got there, and I think it's always important to remember it wasn't a single person, it wasn't a single group, it didn't happen in a single year, and it's not one specific action that did it, and there's no silver bullet to get out of it. Someday, we have to, in my opinion, someday we got to get to the position where we're able to say, what does that city look like that we want? And what are the metrics we use to define success? So in looking at that city, and that's where we're trying to get with budget by priorities and talking to the community about what are our priorities, and then developing metrics around that. And then, what are we willing to pay for? And driving the budget, right, based on that. So building a budget instead of shredding a budget with what we have. We aren't there yet. But that's where we have to get to at some point. So as we're talking to you, this is a 2-year budget, but we're going to focus a lot on 2025, and it'll be clear why, because there's lots of variables as we get to 2026. So we're going to talk a lot about 2025, and we're primarily going to focus on the general fund. And to do that, we used a number of guiding principles as we sort of went into the budgeting process. We wanted to make sure that the public was engaged before, not just after this draft budget was created, but beforehand. We wanted to budget by priorities. Could we start this process of saying what really is important to us in the community and starting with that? That there are a lot of assumptions that are used in developing a budget, just like it happens at home. What's my revenue going to be? What am I using to make that assumption? Is that a sound assumption? What about expenses? How much more will things cost next year? So we want to be transparent about that. We want to be conservative. We don't want to sort of build, oh yeah, people are going to buy lots of stuff. We're going to get lots of sales tax. We're going to be very, very conservative with our estimates on both income and costs. We don't want to just look at cuts as we do this. It's not just cutting. Can we also increase our revenue stream? We aren't going to hide from hard choices, and we need to spread the pain across everywhere. So those were our guiding principles. Our 5 strategies then, sort of coming out of that, are cut, save, sell, borrow, increase. So cut where we can, save where we can, sell what we can, borrow if we need to, and then increase revenues. So you'll hear about all of those. This is the budget process that's been used up to today. So this is, again, we're entering a new budget by priorities process as opposed to starting from where were we last year, what is the increased cost, what can we save. So let's start with priorities. The inventories, this is a new approach. What are our programs? What is it we do, and defining those. Then let's put some prices to those. And then do this. We did the 2 surveys. We also then had council, the retreat with council, and they provided us with their priorities. We created attributes. We'll talk a little bit more about these things. And then there's scoring against those priorities and those attributes, and we'll show you those. Those were done both internally and through the Budget by Priorities Community Advisory Panel. We did 5 focus groups. Then we created the draft budget and started with that. Let's put down numbers and see where we are. And then we said, okay, now it's time to reduce those numbers. And today is the result of that, where we are presenting that to council and to you for deliberation. And later we'll talk about the next steps. This is going to be messy, not just this year. We're starting a whole new process, and if you think about it, the Blue Ribbon Panel presented their report 13 weeks ago. So an awful lot of stuff has happened in this time to get us to this place, introducing all these new projects. So it's going to be messy for a while. But we have a vision of where we're going, and we believe in it, and I think it'll serve the city well. So the council priorities were these, right? Safety in all ways, right? In terms of police for personal safety, property safety, health, fire, catastrophic events, safety across the category, environment, protecting, preserving this place we love, investment in our infrastructure, to make sure that the city and the systems work, livability, to make sure that we are a welcoming community, that people who live here feel that they belong here and that we are that kind of a community, and then economic resiliency. So this is what the council guided us to. The program attributes, so this is the other scoring criteria that our programs were measured against. So level of mandate for the service. Is this something we are required to do by law? Is this something we have to do or want to do? Reliance on the city to do it. Okay, it's important to us, but can other people do it? Can they do it better? Could we partner with them? Degree of cost recovery. Not all things do we have to pay for. Sometimes people reimburse us. percent of the city served, level of internal collaboration, how many departments touch this or collaborate to make this happen. The equity impact, that's really important to our community, is are we being equitable? And then change in demand for the program. So over time, will this change? Has it changed? I'm going to share, these are available, the budget book and other resources. Some of this has been published already in the past, but I was just going to remind you of these from the survey. This was from the statistically valid survey. It was if you could pick only one issue, and these were an open-ended question, if you could pick only one issue, what do you think should be the top priority? And these were the top 4 that came up. Housing affordability, crime and public safety, overdevelopment and growth, and fiscal responsibility in our budget. This is the responses this is the one that was not statistically valid but open to the entire community. Their top 4 were the budget, growth management, safety, and the environment. This, again, all these are available to you to dig more into, but this is a gap analysis. So what you do is ask people how important is an issue to you, and then how satisfied are you with the issue. And this is the list of those issues. And the graph on the right sort of shows you on the top, it says these are the places where you're actually over-servicing us, or that would be one interpretation, where our satisfaction is exceeding the importance level. Now that can change if you look at sort of the subgroups. The top one at the very top on the right is improving, expanding bike paths. So as a community, that might be true like this, but if you were to talk to bikers, you would get a totally different view. But as a community, looking at it from that view, at the very bottom on the right, those are the ones where importance and satisfaction are not aligned, where we are not meeting. Satisfaction is not meeting the level of importance. And those are listed at the bottom. The one at the very bottom with the biggest red. The blue lines, by the way, are importance. The gray lines are satisfaction. Reducing petty crime and burglary, maintaining streets, fixing potholes, cracking down on drug use, and planning for population growth. Those are the ones that are at the bottom. Sidewalks as well. So heads up, you're about to see an awful lot of numbers, and it's a lot. So we need to start with 2024, and it will become relevant when we get to 2025, but we do need to talk about 2024. So our projected revenue was $51 million, and like all of us, what's my income going to be? So that's what I need to not spend more than. So that's how the city operates. We start with assumptions on what is our revenue going to be, so that then as we budget, we aim for that number. So that was the projected revenue coming into 2024. What happened was, though, there were expenses beyond that. So decisions were made to use ARPA money, the one-time money, the $6,250,000, to help offset or to pay for our fire and emergency medical services. Then there was a directive that, historically we could rely on open positions, people leave, so that can buy us $3,200,000. And at the end, council made the choice to let's go ahead and approve the budget with a deficit of $836,000. Anybody who lived through last year can understand why that was made. So, but that adds up to $10 million. So what started as a $51 million budget, because of these things, allowed a $61 million in expenses. And I will come back to that because that's important. So the budget might have been $51 million, but these tools allowed for $61 million. So the highlighted things at the top are the ones I just mentioned, but the additional one at the very top is the $8 million of spending in the reserves, which didn't happen in 2024, but it happened before that, but it carries over, right? We continue to carry that need of replenishing those reserves. So then, as we were targeting that $3 million too, we developed a plan and implemented some strategies to exceed that $3 million to $200,000, and we're on a good path to that. Then things sort of changed as the year went on. There was a contract, the EPOA contract for law enforcement that was signed. There was some money budgeted for that, but it exceeded that budget amount by $1,100,000. The beginning fund balance, so again, as you're aiming for the end of a year, what's our ending balance going to be? What are we going to wrap up the year with? Because then that becomes the beginning balance for next year. That was overestimated by $550,000. The separation payouts, so when people leave, right, we owe them some money. That is something that was not budgeted. We are changing that, but that added another $267,000. and then our revenue was overestimated for this year by 200,000. So that's the whole. So when you hear people talk about $20 million, that's our problem, that's where the $20 million comes from. So before we start talking about what's next, it's everything I just talked about in terms of all the things we're doing and the level of effort that the city is enjoying, and that it took all that money to do. There are a number of things we aren't doing that, in my opinion, we should be doing, but haven't been. And I'm going to give you 6 examples of that. Because when we talk about the budget and making choices, this is also important to note. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these 6. So in a 2018 study about our roads, it was recommended that we invest almost $1.3 million more a year than we are in 2018 dollars. We have not only a legal but a moral obligation to provide ADA ramps for individuals. We are 1,500 behind. That is the cost of 1,500 ramps. Our facilities in 2023, last year, a study was done that said all the stuff we own, that we currently own, we have a $40 million backlog on taking care of those facilities. We want sidewalks. We have 91 miles of no sidewalks. That's, in today's dollars, the cost if we were to go out there today and build sidewalks in 91 miles. And then police, for all of these things, right, there's a million qualifiers for all of these things that I'm mentioning. Washington State is the worst state, as a state, the worst state in the country for the ratio between the number of officers and the number of residents. So as a state, we own that category. If we, in Edmonds, were going to aim for the just to be middle in the country, it would mean adding 33 more officers. There's the price tag. And then emergency prep, I didn't know how to come up with a number for that. I had nothing to reference, but it is a significant concern of mine, and it's not an insignificant amount of money to take it. So then I thought, I wonder, okay, let me just throw some dollars at this. These are just Mike Rosen spending a little time saying, what would a level of effort look like if we could throw some money at it to advance these things, which are important to people? So again, these are just not intended to try to convince you of anything. They're just reference numbers. So roads, you saw what the recommendation was. So if we just spent $500,000 more on our roads, because our roads are in worse condition than they were in 1978. Potholes don't get cheaper or smaller over time. The ramps, if we did that over 20 years in today's dollars, it would be $60,000 a year. According to the consultants who did the study last year, if we worked on the capital investment, that would be another $2 million a year. Maintenance and repair, they suggested $400,000, and they suggested 4 additional maintenance crew on our buildings. Sidewalks, if we just threw $500,000 a year at it, obviously that was a really big number, but at least we'd whittle away at it, so $500,000 a year. If we aimed for half of the half for the ratio of police officers, again, I just put a number at it. And then emergency prep, again, an allocation of resource, I just threw $500,000. So those numbers, but that by itself, those numbers against, here's how far behind, here are things we aren't doing, that got us to another $6,700,000. These are things we aren't doing and haven't been doing, and you aren't going to hear me recommending that we do any of those today. But when we talk about what our choices are, because all of this is about choices, these are the decisions we've been making. That's part of how we've been able to move forward in the past, is by not addressing some of these concerns. And we have to get to the position in this community where we can start addressing them. And that's part of saying, what do we want in a community? What does success look like? And what are the metrics we're going to use? What are we willing to pay for it? And making the hard choices. So again, just a reminder that this is what it took. It wasn't one single action. We used one-time money, we spent our reserves, we delayed and deferred important work, we were optimistic in our projections, and cost increased significantly faster than our revenues. A lot of things contributed to this. So here's our next problem. So now we're looking at 2025. So projected revenue, so at this point our revenue projections, and Kim's going to talk a little bit about that, is a little over $53 million. So when we sat down and said to staff, okay, you've developed your programs, now we're assuming, council has in the past approved positions because there was work that needed to be done and they agreed and had to be convinced and they authorized those positions. So we're entering the budget process by assuming, okay, let's start from that standpoint. These projects, and all the positions that have been filled. All the open positions would have been filled. So that number comes up to 66 million. And you can see the gap there is 13 million. So now I need to go back to the story I just told you. That $13 million, if you look at, right, it was sort of an artificially inflated budget. So by using ARPA, the savings, the contract that took place, the council approved deficit, and then throwing in a COLA increase, that is 12.5 million of that. So you can see the 13 million isn't really 13 million because of this $12 million that had done there. Hard to follow, but I can tell you're tracking with me. So when we came up with that gap, 13 million, we said to staff, we got to find 7 of it. That's the starting number. We're going to look for $7 million, which is, remember the story I just told you about this gap and how far it really is. So we went forward and did a hunt for $7 million. So before we get further in that, everything that I say to you, right, can be changed. So it's really important in all of this is a draft. This is a draft. And now council needs to dig in, and they can change lots of variables. They can look at our savings and say, didn't go far enough. Or they can say, like where you went, don't like how you did it. They can say, don't want to give some of those things up. They can say, when they look at some of the revenue assumptions, let's step on that now instead of later, right? And they're going to be engaging the community a lot in these conversations. So all these key assumptions, remember, are in terms of these kinds of things, are based on, here's what you're looking at today with a big word draft on it, and now it's time to dig into it. Also, this assumption, and this is important to note, these are assumptions. We have to provide a balanced budget. So for the purposes of that, we made some assumptions that if we can save in 2025, if we can save $7 million through the ideas that we came up with, we're going to need to borrow $7.5 million in 2025. And we're suggesting, and in this draft, it is suggesting that is an internal loan. We are also, for the purposes of assumption, now council has not committed yet that they are going to put in front of the community annexation. We are still negotiating with the RFA. It could be annexation, it could be a contract, it could be something else. But for the purposes of the budget, we made the assumption that there's annexation. Through this process, if that changes, we dig back into the budget. It also assumed, as council had sort of given directive already, that if annexation happens, they would keep the little over $6 million in tax revenue. So that's one of the assumptions. And then there is the assumption that later in 2025, if there is annexation, that will go in front of the public in April. And then based on the results of that election, we still have a gap, and we would need to go to the community and ask for a levy lift. So if the public said no to the annexation, then that informs the budget. If they say yes, then that informs what that levy lift will look like. So when you hear us talking about 2026, that is a very soft number. It's in there because we had to make some assumptions, balance the budget. But these are huge variables. How we deal with our fire and EMS service, and what that levy looks like, and how you as the voters vote. So those are assumptions that are made in here, and with a monster big capitalized word qualifiers. These are some of the examples of what a $7 million impact looks like. So all of our non-represented staff, which means all staff who are not in unions, will be on furlough for 12 days next year. 46 positions will be unfilled. People will lose their job. People who rely on their jobs, and their families rely on their jobs, and their self-fulfillment. People will lose their jobs. The remote office will close. We won't have Beach Ranger Summer Camp or Meadowdale Preschool. One fewer animal control officer. Council minutes will not be as detailed. They will just be action details. We looked at things that cost every little bit. We dug deep. We will switch from Zoom to Teams. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it's 5 figures. We're going to have reduced HR staff, 1 less probation officer in the courts, reduced professional services, which will impact our waterfront neighborhood planning, 2 fewer people in our finance department, reduced overtime. We will sell some vehicles, and we will do only mandatory trainings. This is just a sample of the kinds of impacts that $7 million of cutting does. We also, as you know, we entered this year saying it's not just about how did we get here and what do we need to do, it's how do we prevent it in the future. So these are some of the fundamental changes that we've already put in motion or already done. And some of the highlights, obviously, financial reports and timing, that was a very early one so that we can be, and council can be more informed more quickly, and we can course correct in time to have an impact. You can read many of these, just highlight a couple of the financial policies are being revised, our purchasing policies are being revised. We are incorporating future operating impacts on new, so if you make a decision this year but there's an ongoing cost, let's put that in the assumptions and make the decisions knowing what the impacts are going to be downstream. We always look at, protecting your money that is invested. Is there any way to get more out of it? So I'm sure you've read ahead of me, but that's the kind of things that we're doing to try to help make sure this doesn't happen again. So with that as a starting place, I'll turn it over to Kim to talk a little bit further about the budget. And I'm going to turn this, is this on already? And I'm going to turn mine off.
Great. Kim Dunscombe, Acting Finance Director. Really, thank you everyone for being here this evening. I'm kind of excited to actually present the proposed budget. It's been a long haul, I'm sure, for everyone this summer. It does present months of careful planning and collaboration and thoughtful consideration of the city's priorities, our community needs, and most importantly, fiscal responsibility. This year's budget is particularly important to us as we start to transition into our priority-based budgeting approach. And of course, we are still in a fiscal emergency, so that just makes this biennium even the more important. Our goal is to better align our spending with services and programs that our community values most, ensuring that we maximize every single dollar that we spend. We want to continue to move in this direction. This biennium, we're still presenting the budget by line items and departments, just like we're used to. There is an added benefit in doing that, in that it really holds us accountable as a department for spending within our set limits. In today's presentation, I'm going to discuss some key assumptions. I'll discuss projected revenues and department expenditures, focusing, of course, on the general fund, as the mayor said. My apologies to Public Works. Everyone knows that the wastewater treatment plant is my most favorite city facility. Okay, so in the budget book this year, we're going to have a page dedicated to our key assumptions. Key assumptions really establish the foundation for our budget. It provides readers with transparency and a clear understanding of the factors that influence our projections. So to talk to just about a few of our major key assumptions, property taxes. So we assumed a 1.25% increase from 24 to 25. That extra 0.25% is due to our attributed to new construction growth. South Regional Fire District annexation. As the mayor noted, this is a major assumption. We're assuming that we will annex into the fire district. This reduces our EMS levy to 0 in 2026, as well as our EMS transport revenues, and of course, our projected expenses for that fire contract in 26. All three of those go to 0. Sales and use tax. We are going to forecast a very conservative 3% increase from 2024's year-end estimate to our 25 budget. Utility taxes, we're seeing a mixed trend here. We have some utility taxes that are increasing and some that are decreasing. So from 24 year-end estimate to 25, our utility tax revenue forecast stays relatively flat. We've also built in $3 million of revenue combined for our school zone and our red light camera revenue. This is going to be somewhat offset, of course, with an increase to our court staff to the tune of about $145,000 in 25 to $210,000 in 26. Also of major note, and something that we've been talking about all year, and as the mayor has also said, we're assuming having to borrow an interfund loan in 25. This loan amount is $7.5 million. And it actually does assume making one loan payment in 25. Other choices that we make and we go through our budget process can choose different options. I wanted to build this as a worst case scenario to just see how our strategic forecast looks in the year out, assuming that payment. Other standard assumptions are salaries and benefits will increase, salaries will increase 3.8%, that is consistent with CPI. And our medical benefits will increase 8.5%, and that's consistent with the information in the forecast that AWC provided us earlier in the summer. Other staffing assumptions, again, we're going to increase court staff to accommodate the increase in our ticket review process. We have also forecasted hiring an emergency management coordinator in '25, and we also have provided funding for a grant analyst / lobbyist. Right now, that is actually built in as a professional service. We can make different choices throughout the year or throughout this budget deliberation process if we think that that should be an FTE instead. Now, I think that this is the most important slide of the evening. Second, of course, to all the other slides that Mayor Rosen has presented, especially the one on chocolate chip cookies. I think that this really resembles part of our struggle here in Edmonds. It shows our heavy reliance on property tax. Property tax is about 30% of our revenue, and of course we all know that that has a state cap of 1%. So this creates a revenue stagnation issue, especially when inflation in the cost of providing services increases more than 1%. So this creates a strain on our local services. With this cap in place, the ability to expand or maintain our services sustainably and without providing any new sources for revenue is very, very limited. Sales and use tax, our second biggest revenue source, is highly dependent on consumer spending and of course fluctuates with economic conditions. And during economic downturns, this source can drop significantly, impacting the city's ability to sustain our essential services. It's cyclical in nature and is unpredictable at times, yet it's one of our main resources. Utility tax, as I've mentioned before, has very mixed trends going forward, and the City of Edmonds has nearly exhausted its ability to increase utility rates due to state-imposed limits. This restricts the potential for further increases, making growth in this revenue dependent on utility usage as opposed to rate adjustments. And revenue from utilities is largely based on utility consumption, like I just said, electricity use, water use, et cetera. And as residents adopt more energy efficient utilities, our washers and dryers and such, as well as water saving practices and utility usage decreases, this revenue stream will be adversely affected. That's obviously a good news, bad news story. I love when I use less utilities, but from a city's revenue perspective, that is the downside. Charges for services, the next biggest, obviously, is also, like sales tax, linked to economic conditions. A substantial portion of charges for services comes from our permits, which are highly dependent on the housing market and construction activity. If the economy slows down, housing and construction projects may decline, leading to a drop in our permit-related revenue. So just like sales tax, it's very economic sensitive. So overall, our revenue diversification is a challenge for us here in the City of Edmonds. With very few flexible revenue options, the city is vulnerable to economic downturns and state-imposed limits, reducing our ability to fund our services on a continued basis. So where do our dollars go? So while we transition, like I said before, into party-based budgeting, we still are reporting all of our expenses by department. It does have that bonus of being able to keep us accountable to our department budgets. And as you can see, this pie chart is very colorful, and I think it has a very great diversification. I will call out the two biggest pieces of this pie. The police department is budgeted at $19.7 million, which represents about 32% of our total expenditures. I'll note here that we have moved millions of dollars that were previously budgeted in other departments into the police department. And the police department, when they give their presentation to council later this month, will speak to the details of that move. Regardless, this aligns with the city's priorities, where we have seen time and time again that public safety will remain a top priority. The other big piece of the pie is what we call our non-department department. So the non-department is $15.6 million, about 26% of our total budget. And this includes the city's fire contract. In 2025, we have that budgeted at $12.1 million. And again, this is going to fall in line with the community's top priority of public safety, fire, and EMS. So the budget diversification reflects the city's commitment to public safety, with our police and our fire services consistently ranked as top priorities of our community. So all of this math, in and out, where does that leave the general fund at the end of 2025? Just above over $500,000. And this also relieves or puts our contingency reserve fund intact at $2.2 million. I want to give you a little sneak peek into the budget book that will be provided and on our website. So we're going to start the budget book with the mayor's message. This provides our purpose and our vision. This section is essential for understanding what's included in the budget and why. The mayor's message offers a high-level explanation of budget priorities, our key decisions, and the city's strategic goals for the upcoming fiscal year. The next section, which will be new, is our priority-based budgeting summary. This section provides an overview of the city's new budgeting approach, focusing on programs and outcomes rather than on traditional line item budgets. It offers a summary of how the city's programs were evaluated and scored based on their alignment with the city's strategic priorities and our basic program attributes. This will help the readers understand how resources allocated based on the value and the impact of the programs rather than just line item budgets. But of course, we're going to have our line item budgets. So the next part of the budget book will be our fund schedules, and this will feel familiar for those that have reviewed our budgets in prior years. It represents the revenues and expenses for each fund in a detailed line item format. It provides clear financial data for each major fund category, and it offers a snapshot of the city's financial health, showing how all the money coming in and being spent, so the money going out across all of our various funds, allows for a detailed analysis of our specific areas of revenue and spending. Then, of course, we'll have our department sections. This section provides an in-depth look at the department's budget, showing a breakdown of all of our line item budgets, personnel, supplies, and professional services. And then we'll also have a section for our capital funds. This section focuses on our capital projects, providing details on funding for infrastructure improvements and our building projects. So the overall emphasis is our mayor's message will come first. It will set the tone for our budget process and all of our budget decisions. Our priority-based budgeting summary will show you how we got there, and then we'll have our fund schedules and our department schedules to give you more line item details.
Thanks, Kim. So now the other side of the coin. Where can we make money? And I think a reminder of, we all do have tax fatigue, but I think it's important to remember, as Kim mentioned, the reliance we have on property tax. For every dollar people in Edmond spend on property tax, a little over 14 cents comes to the city. So we raised our hand and said we want schools, we want to support schools, we want to support sound transit and other transportation. So for every dollar we spend on property tax, about 14 cents comes to the city. Similarly with sales tax, for every dollar we spend on sales tax, that 10.5 cents you pay, a little less than a penny comes to us. Goes to a lot of other things. So not huge. As an example of what that means, here's a comparison between us and Linwood. We're about the same size. We're actually a little bigger than Linwood. If you can see, their general fund revenue is $80 million. Ours was around $50 million. And look at the difference in property tax revenues, right? Ours is 15 million, theirs is only 4 million. So 31% of our general fund comes from property tax, and for Linwood, it's 7%. They have them all. They have lots of retail. We don't have those things. So this is the impact of that. That is one of the reasons why we have such a heavily reliance on our property tax, because of the other revenue streams that we don't have available to us. So we need to find some. So here's 28 ideas. These are ideas. Some of these aren't going to sound very good, but you start this process by saying, what's everything we can think about? What's everything we could possibly do? And here's a starting place. Here's 28 starting places. And they're going to fall into these 4 categories. What is it we're doing? Can we do it more? What are the things we aren't doing? Could we start? What is it we have that we could sell that we might not be, that we could do without? And what else is out there? So we'll start up here. We collect credit card fees, right? There's a credit card fee every time we use one, and we collect some of those. And for some of those fees, we're actually limited on how much we can collect. And for that, we do. But in other cases, we could do better. So there's some opportunity there. We could increase sales tax, property tax levy, which we talked about earlier, increase our business license rate. We support nonprofits. We like nonprofits. We give them help so that they can survive. But, you know, should we be charging a market or a higher rate for some of them in their use of the museum or the Wade James Theater or the old Public Works building? Could we increase pet license fees? There's a lot of pets in Edmonds. We have had a difficult time negotiating our franchise with PUD and Puget Sound Energy, and maybe we could step that up and find some favorable results. And we could also, we've done a really good job, especially in parks this year, in raising our program fees, but other opportunities, both in terms of things we aren't charging or that we could increase. Potentially introduce, we are not charging a fire impact fee. So when people build, right, we charge them park impact fees and other impact fees, which is how we can make some improvements. We don't currently charge for a fire impact fee. We could charge for false alarms. We could charge an admission tax. We could allow gambling. Let me say that again. We could allow gambling. Could add a affordable housing tax, commercial parking tax, so that would be on parking lots. We could look at parking meters. We could reduce the fees we pay ourselves for utilities. So every time we water parks, and we have a lot of parks, we use a lot of water, we pay the same thing you pay at home. So the city is charging itself for utilities at the same rate. Many governments across the country create a government rate for the reason that you're probably figuring out. And other cities are already starting to introduce park entrance fees. So things we could potentially introduce. Things we might want to sell: the Meadowdale Clubhouse, the Wade James property, valuable, the Francis Anderson Center, the City Hall. I do think it would make a great boutique hotel. Ads on our website. We could sell sponsorship, naming rights for some of our assets. And we did recently buy a whole lot of police cars, right? So are there things like that? So what are the kinds of things we could sell? And then joining the RFA, retain the tax revenue, right? That is another other category. We could eliminate the MFTE. We could share costs, resources with neighboring cities. We do some of that now. Could we do more? Are there other kinds of things? And we have actually started having those kinds of conversations. So those are some ideas that we could put on the table to generate more revenue, and certainly open to any and all. Some of these would have less popularity and not necessarily generate a lot of funds. Others might be not popular but generate a lot of funds. But these are all opportunities that we should be exploring. So when you start talking about cuts, right, and okay, what if we went further? What if? So there are certain things that we are obligated to provide by law. One could argue what is the level of effort you need to provide, but there are certain things we have to provide, and there are other things that we feel obligated to provide. Oddly enough, police is not on that list, but I think we would all argue, yeah, we ought to be doing that. So this is. Sorry?
Police is not on the list for fire.
Police are not RCW driven. No worries. So things we have to have: city council, clerks, we have to have a court. We feel we should have a police department. We intend to have a police department. We have to pay our debts. These are other things: election fees, engineering facilities, finance departments, fire and EMS again, HR insurance. You can read it. So these are, if we were to cut some of the, all these could be cut, but these are sort of the last off the table. Notice Parks isn't on this list. And I think we would all argue that quality of life, remember up at the top, and if you talk to people about the things they love about this place, but if people were to say, keep going, or if the community says, no, 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 then these are, this is what those kinds of things look like. So here's the next steps. So you saw where everything that got us to here. So on Thursday, the council will be in this room partnering with the council. It's not an official council meeting. Thank you, Council President. It isn't an official council meeting, so some of the council members will be here to meet with the public in partnership with the Edmonds Civic Roundtable to start hearing your feedback about the budget that is now being presented. So that's this week. Then you can see the different dates on here, and what those are is the departments get in front of the council and present their budgets and what they're proposing and what some of the cuts mean, and they will be in front. You can see those. There are 3 public hearings scheduled throughout, and you can see the council has put deliberations on the schedule and then also parked 3 potential meetings as well, depending on how deliberations go. And then, as always, council does like to hear from people however you choose to engage, but these are sort of the official processes that are being put on the schedule. The target at this point is to have the budget approved by November 26th, so that's what this is all targeting for. And then, looking at it sort of further out, as we've shared in the past, the assumptions are that council, and again, I referenced all the variables to 2026, but in 2025, council will approve the budget. Then in 2025, so 2024, they'll approve it. In 2025, we have the budget. We will fund the gap in the budget, whatever is resolved. The assumption is that we would borrow internally. Then also, again, the assumption is we would go to the public and put to a vote if annexation is something that they would support. So that decision would be made in 2025 based on that answer, yes or no. Then we would be looking at a levy lift. So the budget would be modified as well as readjusting what the 2026 assumptions are or the needs are as we go through this year. Through the 2025 year, so asking for a levy list, so potentially asking for annexation in April, levy lift in November. Based on those, if the answer is yes in 2026, as Kim mentioned, we would repay the loan for 2025 in 2026, and then in 2027, we would start repaying, and in this case, we're recommending a 10-year replenishment of the reserves. So those are all the assumptions. It always feels good to know you're not alone. So if you look on the left side, those are other cities in the state and some of the deficits that they're facing. Seattle is looking at $250 million, Spokane $50 million. If you look at across the country, 75 of the largest cities in the country are facing major deficits. That one at the top, that's New York. If you were to spread New York's deficit across every one of their taxpayers, it would mean $57,000 per taxpayer is the deficit that New York is facing. I don't know if it makes you feel better, but there it is. Misery loves company. Yeah. So as I promised at the beginning, right, this is to get out of this, we have to spread the pain in all ways, and it's going to affect us all. There is nobody in Edmonds who is not going to be impacted by this. This is, as all decisions in this city are, we are being held up by a 4-legged stool or a table. So that is Edmonds, our very fragile city. We have some cracks going on in it, but it's being held up by the 4 legs, right? It is council and the community and the administration and staff. We all have to pull together to make this happen. We can't make it happen if we are dysfunctional. So we have to work together to get out of that. And the next few months are where we sort of have to roll up our sleeves all at this table and protect that fragile city that we all love. So it's time, call on our inner superheroes, and I would encourage us to think about it's not just about today. The decisions we're making, this is a city, we are just temporary stewards. So as we think about all of these decisions, let's please also remember that what we're doing is protecting this amazing place for the future. So let's keep some generations in our mind as we're going forward. And with that, I thank you for being here and for being attentive and for consuming all those numbers. And if you want to keep going with us, there's a council meeting at 7. You are all encouraged and invited to come. So thank you. Have a good rest of your evening.